Hi, and welcome to a video sermon from First Baptist Church Lloydminster. We're joyful you could be here. We hope you'll be encouraged by the words you hear today and that God will speak to you through this message. If you want more information about First Baptist Church, visit our website at fbclloyd.ca and download our app for Apple, Android, and Windows Phone. Now, here's the latest from First Baptist Church. We hope you enjoy.
Good morning, everyone. Happy long weekend to you. Honestly, I wasn't sure what to do for today. I was almost hoping nobody would be here. We're in the second week of our meHarmony series, and we're going to be talking about marriages today, and so maybe that explains a little bit of my trepidation. It's one thing when you're asked to come and bring a sermon, prepare a message on something that you're not overly familiar with and maybe that you're not even sort of intimately engaged in. But it's a whole nother level of challenge to come and bring a message on a subject that you are familiar with and are intimately engaged in, but where you recognize that you fail in it regularly and sometimes abysmally. That's a whole nother level of challenge. And if I'm honest this morning, it feels to me today like the D student is being asked to come and bring a paper so that the rest of the class can get an A. And I'm not sure exactly how that works. I think that God had this date circled on his calendar since before time began. I'm not sure exactly how that works. I'm going to invent time, creation, people. I'm going to rocket forward a few thousand years, and I'm going to circle this date, because on that day, Doug's going to be talking about marriage, and I don't want to miss that. Anybody that doesn't think God has a sense of humor, I beg to differ. It is so clear to me that he's got an amazing sense of humor. Let me just say right from the outset here that Fran and I have been married for coming up on 23 years this year. And the only reason that we have been successful this far, the only reason that we have any hope of hopefully being successful in the future is because Fran has the gift of martyrdom. That's the bottom line. And it's true. Actually, a week ago, I was saying that my mom, when God saw me coming along, he knew that I was going to need help, so he gave me the best mom in the world. And when he saw me coming along and going to get married, he gave me the best wife in the world because he knew I was going to need help. It's true. I went home and I told Fran, hey, I've got to speak on marriage. And she said, oh, is that right? And I said, yeah. And so she suggested that I should maybe speak about 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 1. And so I don't know if you're like me. I started to try and do the math on that. Well, wait a second. 1 Corinthians 13 is the love chapter. 1 Corinthians 7, what's that? So if you're in that boat, let me just cut to the chase for you. 1 Corinthians 7, verse 1 is where Paul says that it's the best option to not get married. I had to go and look that up. So anyways, with that auspicious start, let's begin. I'm going to look at our topic today from three different perspectives. I'm going to look at it, first of all, from sort of the big picture, if you will, of marriage. Then I'm going to look at it through the lens of vows a little bit. And then finally, we're going to end up looking at it 5 different ways that are practical and that will hopefully be just relevant and meaningful for those of us that are in marriage, maybe even some that are coming up on marriage, to apply at some point to marriage. And on that note, this morning, I get it, man. If you're here and you're not married, you're already deciding how to tune out and what you could be doing that would be better than hanging out here for the next half an hour or so. But I'd encourage you, pay attention, stick around, because I think in some ways this message might actually be more for you than it is for those of us that are in marriage, given that your slate is still clean and you can actually start right from the word go and get a lot of these things in place right off the hop. So don't tune out. And I recognize too that a lot of us are coming at this topic from a number of different respects, number of different perspectives this morning. Some that have been married once or twice or three times or what have you, or some that have been widowed, some that are in the midst of engagement. There's just so many different permutations and combinations of ways to approach this. And I'm going to go more or less right up the heart, right up the middle today, because I can't get into all of the different little aspects and segues that relate to marriage. So I trust that God will do the heavy lifting this morning and that He will find a way to help you apply this and make it relevant in your world, regardless of what your circumstances are. So let's pray and then we'll dive in. Father, this morning, again, we stop, and just as Barry said earlier, just as he was imploring us, God, we want to lean into you today. We would love to know more of you, particularly in this whole area of marriage and relationship. God, would you open our hearts and our minds today so that we can find you, so that we can then apply what you show us to our lives, so that our relationships would be better, our marriages would be stronger, more fulfilling, better examples. And so to that end, God, I'd ask for your work here this morning by your Spirit. And I ask these things in your Son's name and for His sake. Amen. All right. So like many things, the topic of marriage actually begins far before we get to marriage itself. So oftentimes we talk about marriage and we think that happens after I say I do or I will. But really, it begins far earlier than that. The world talks a really good game about relationship and about marriage. They tell us about how significant it is, and they tell us about how important it is. But at the end of the day, the world comes back to the same thing, which is to say that marriages and relationships are disposable. That if they don't pay dividends for you, if they don't return benefits to you in the way that you want and in the volume or manner that you would like, that then you can dispose of them, start over, go a different direction, what have you. And this morning, as we come to this topic, we need to understand it from the topic of God. Because at His heart, at His core, God is about relationship. We find that not only from the fact that He wants a relationship with each one of us, but also that He would like relationship with us as a whole, as a church. And He is also of primary interest in our relationships with one another. And as we go to His Word, we find advice and instruction over and over and over as to how to approach these relationships, because they are that important to Him. So when we understand then that relationship is important to Him, and we come to marriage and find that marriage is instituted by God, it's ordained by God, then we can understand from that alone that marriage is of utmost importance, it is inherently valuable and of worth, significant. So just the institution alone, God has ordained it, He is all about it, that makes it worthy of our importance and our significance, of ascribing it importance and significance in our minds and in our lives. But He doesn't stop there. He takes it another step further, because we find then that not only is marriage itself important, but your marriage is significant and important to God. Your upcoming marriage is important and significant to God. We read in Mark 10, verses 7 and 8, this: "The two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one." And here we're talking not about the marriage or a marriage. He's talking about each marriage. When two come together, they will become one flesh. The two will become one. Now, Paul calls that a mystery. And I call it supernatural. Something supernatural takes place in marriage. It is more than just some sort of social construct or some sort of social contract. Something supernatural happens when two people come together. God makes them one. And they are no longer two, but one flesh. That's phenomenal. I have some theories about that, some ideas at least. Ryan and I were talking about them this week. And unfortunately, they're just theories. They're just ideas, so I won't go into them this morning. But it's fascinating to me to find out that the transaction of marriage has a supernatural element to it. So your marriage is that important to God, that there's something supernatural that transpires, that He accomplishes in that. So marriage is important on those two levels, but it carries on beyond that as well. Marriage is also important because it is one of the primary ways that we demonstrate to the world around us about who God is. You and I are walking billboards. In each of our interactions, in each of our conversations, we are testifying to who God is in our lives, or who He is not, if we're not doing them properly. And so it carries forward then that in our relationships then we testify to who God is. And so much more so then in our marriage relationships. When we look at marriage and we model for the world around us then who God is through that relationship, we again understand the value of marriage, because this is the way that God is again demonstrating Himself to our society, to those around us. As such, it's important then that we not just evaluate marriage from what we derive from it, but rather then what we invest in it. That's the perspective that we should be looking at it from. Not as the world says, look at it for all that it's worth to you, and when it's not worth anything to you, discard it. But rather, we should look at marriage from the perspective of it is this important to God. It is this important that there would be a supernatural transaction that occurs within it. And it's an opportunity for me to testify to the world around me about who God is. Therefore, then I am going to invest in it. It is that valuable. And I'm not going to just dabble in this investment, but I'm going all in. We know how much God has invested in each of us and our relationship with Him. He has invested it all. He invested Himself to the point of death so that He can have a relationship with us. Therefore, model your marriage after His example and invest yourself. We should invest ourselves in marriage to that extent. We can't bail when our wives or our husbands make a mistake. At that point, we double down. We get at it. We help walk through that. And we can't just abandon the ship when the going gets tough. When Mrs. Right runs into a health problem, then that doesn't make her all of a sudden Mrs. Wrong. At that point, we step up. We get involved and we invest in that marriage and in our spouses, just like God has invested in us. I think that we once again need to, in our society, recapture a sense of the gravity of marriage, the significance of it, and the investment that needs to be placed in it. What God has ordained, we need to understand of significant worth. And then we need to invest in it accordingly. Think of it in terms of the things that you already regard as valuable in your lives. Not to say that you don't value your marriages already, but even kids understand things that are of value and how we treat them. I was riding along with my kids the other day, and they were talking about Ferraris. And they were saying, well, what would you do if you had a Ferrari? And one of them, I laughed, I appreciated it. They said, well, I sure wouldn't be driving it down this gravel road. And they're right, aren't they? When you have something that is of that much value, you don't abuse it. You don't do things to it that are going to be conflicting with the value. You want to do things that are going to enhance the value. You wax it, you polish it, you put it in a nice garage, you say goodnight to it at night because you care. So we need to do that with our marriages. We need to understand the significance of them. And when we begin to understand the significance of them, then we understand too the vows that go with them. Now, we can see through vows the significance. And when we get to marriage, ultimately it comes through this path. At some point, we've got to take some sort of a vow. We have to make some sort of a pledge. And so, this is what stands between us as single and married, is what we say when we get to that point. Douglas B. Bainton, do you take Fran to be your lawfully wedded wife? Do you promise to love her, comfort her, honor and keep her for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and health, and forsaking all others, to be faithful only to her for as long as you both shall live? And Fran, do you take Doug to be your lawfully wedded husband? Do you promise to love him, comfort him, honor and keep him for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and health, and forsaking all others, be faithful only to him for as long as you both shall live? I was in a line at the convenience store here a while ago, and it was Valentine's Day, and right in front of me, a lady was at the till, and the lady running the till said to her, "What are you doing for Valentine's Day?" She said, "Well, we're renewing our vows." And I knew the lady that was running the till, and she turned to me and she said, "Hey, Doug, how about that? Are you going to renew your vows?" And before I even knew it, I said, "Are you kidding me? Not a chance. I got Fran to say yes once. I'm not reopening negotiations." So the fact is, your vows don't have to look like these ones. And maybe they didn't. Maybe you wrote your own vows. I use these ones because they succinctly and I think very accurately spell out for us what God expects for us in our marriage. The way that we're going to approach it, the way that we're going to treat it. And I think that they also very nicely and succinctly reflect the way that God looks at us. Like Ryan was talking about, his view of us as his bride. And so I appreciate these vows. So you can use whichever ones you like, but I would encourage you to come back and look at these. Model yours after these ones. Reflect on these ones if you're already married. When we remember from James 5, verse 12, that we're to let our yeas be yeas, just in the normal course of life, as we're talking to one another and as we're making agreements and as we're making commitments, that, okay, yes, I'm going to do that. Well, then, if I said I'm going to do it, then I better do it. God underlines that for us there in James 5. But when we take a vow before God, and therefore to God, because He is watching that, and we might as well be vowing it to Him if we're vowing it to another. So when we take a vow, it escalates to another level. In Ecclesiastes 5, verses 4 and 5, we read this: "When you make a vow to God, do not delay to fulfill it. He has no pleasure in fools. Fulfill your vow. It is better not to make a vow than to make one and not fulfill it." So don't enter your vows lightly. That's the first lesson there. Then, beyond that, there's a couple other things that we can learn. Secondly, focus on your vows, not your spouse's. Don't look at everything that they said they were going to do. Look at the things that you said you were going to do. When I have a problem and I run into an issue with Fran, it really does not help when I go back and say, yeah, but you promised to do this, 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 and this. Not productive. It's far more productive for me to go back and look at the fact that I promised to do this, 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 and this. And when I look at those things, then I recognize, if I'm honest at all, even remotely honest with myself, that I have failed in my commitment. And at that point, it behooves me to go back and do a better job of my vows, not point at the way that they're not working on her side of the fence. So focus on your vows, not on your spouse's. And then secondly, I would add to that, when you look at your vows, take the less romantic road and entertain that for a few minutes. I, Doug, take you, Fran, to be my lawfully wedded wife. And I'm going to do that in sickness. I'm going to do that for poorer, for worse. I'm going to do that for all my life, even if I live to be 102. Take the less romantic road and the long road there and consider that. Think about that. And then ask yourself, is this the person that I want to do that with? If you haven't already become married? And if you haven't, and you're considering this, and you arrive at the decision that this is not who you want to make that commitment to, then get out now. Don't mess around. Call it a day and walk away. I don't want to be a Debbie Downer and be pessimistic. Hopefully your life will be positive and you'll experience the great parts of marriage, the for betters, in health, for richer, all the way along. But we need to be realistic enough this morning to understand that there is no guarantee of that. And so if it turns out that your circumstances are on the other side of the spectrum, then be ready for that. Have contemplated that ahead of time, so that when you make that commitment and vow, that you are prepared for that. And at this point, I need to underline something here that goes along with this. It is so important that you not be unequally yoked. If you haven't come to this point in your life where you've made a marriage commitment, then I can't underline enough for you the importance of choosing a spouse and choosing a mate that shares your faith, that shares your perspective of God, that will approach life the same way that you will approach your life by virtue of what you hold dear in your faith. Now, when we look at the significance that God puts on marriage, then it makes sense to choose someone to marry that shares that perspective and that is going to be pointed at the same objective. And when we recognize the investment that must be placed in marriage, well, then we're wise to recognize, too, that I'm going to need help with that, because you and I don't show up at this party automatically prepared, completely equipped. We come to this broken. We come to this with problems. And so we need God to help us in our marriages. A cord of 3 strands, you, your spouse, and God, is not easily broken. So if you approach it and your spouse does not share that perspective, well, then that's going to make it more difficult. We need to approach marriage with the understanding, with the intent of doing it with someone that shares our faith in God and the way that that changes our life. That is not to say this morning, don't hear me say that non-Christians are not good people, that they're not nice people, that there's a problem with non-Christians. I'm not saying that at all. As a matter of fact, some of my favorite people in the world are non-Christians. But that works for me because I do not have the relationship with them that I have with my wife. My relationship with them is great, but it only goes so far. They are not involved in the most intimate details of my life, the most important aspects of my life. I definitely don't talk to them about how I raise my kids and what I do with my finances. And when we get to those intimate, those deepest levels of our world and our lives, and we are talking about those things, and a non-Christian, someone that doesn't share our beliefs, is involved, then it almost arbitrarily will breed difficulty, if not disaster, because they're not going to share our same perspective. So don't hear me say that they're bad people. Hear me saying this morning that our faith has to be so central and important in our lives that we will bring our spouse into that on the same basis, not on a different basis. It has to be that important to us. Now, at the same time, I want to stop and I want to detour here briefly for a minute, because there are some of us that are in relationships now with spouses that do not share our faith. And I think at this point, it's important that I talk about that just a little bit. First of all, if you're in that circumstance, then remember, first and foremost, God loves your spouse even more than you do, regardless of the fact of whether or not he is or she is a Christian, whether or not they share your faith. He loves them. He died for them too. So he is in this with you, and he is for your spouse. Secondly, if they are willing to continue in that relationship with you, despite your faith decision, then you too stay with them, stick with them, and then love them just the way that God instructs us to love our spouses biblically. They might not share that same perspective, but you bring to it everything that you would even if that marriage was equally yoked. You're in it just the same way. Now, I'm not so naive this morning as to not recognize that that's going to come with some challenges, with some difficulties. And so I appreciate that. And as a church, we will try and stand with you in that. We'll try and help you whatever way we can. Come and talk to me if there's a way that we can help you with that. We'd love to try and help. But more important even than that, remember that God is standing with you in that relationship as well. And he is there for you every day to help you to understand and love your spouse better, to help you show your spouse who he is, so that they can hopefully one day come to that same point where they acknowledge him as Lord as well in their lives. God wants your marriage to be successful. And he is in it to that end. So remember that. And especially when you're in a position where you are hoping that they will come to that point where they will understand what you understand and that we'll accept it for yourself. We oftentimes seem to get impatient with that, don't we? We want to move forward with it quickly. But let him pace you. Ask him for help in pacing yourself so that you don't rush it, so that you don't push it. Because so often times that disillusions them and it just drives them further away. So go to God and ask him each day to help you navigate that. Okay. Quickly then, we're going to switch gears, and I want to switch to 5 things that we can apply in our marriages that will hopefully help us, that will improve our marriages as we go. And I think there's some things already that we can apply, but I think these things are going to be really practical on a number of different levels. At least I hope they are. So let's take a look at them. First of all, I want to look at Ephesians 5, verses 22 to 24. This seems to be sort of a hot button issue when it comes to marriage. Oftentimes, I hear this come up regularly, and there's a little bit of tension around it. So let's tackle it really quickly. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Now, I'm not going to unpack this really in depth this morning. I would encourage you to actually go back in one of our other relationship series. If you just Google back through them or YouTube through them, you'll find some relationship series, and Pastor Mark unpacks this really nicely. The problem here is that guys walk away thinking that I'm the boss. And then the girls come to this and they have a problem with this whole idea of submit, because in our society, submission is not the most desirable of positions to be in. And so, I'll just try and sum it up for you, is that God says you guys are the head of the home so long as you love your wives the way that Christ loves the church, which is to say, you got to get it right every time, all the time. So when you get to that point, boys, feel free to be the boss. And until then, be careful. And girls, submission is an issue. I get that. Our society doesn't really get excited about that. But submission doesn't become a problem when you know that the guy is doing what's best for you to the best of his ability all the time, every time. You know, when you know that they are doing what they think is really right for you, then it's way easier for you to submit to that because you know that they care for you. So that's the gist of it. But if you go back and look at it, Pastor Mark unpacks it really well. I want to just pick up here because it continues to be an issue, and I want to pick it up on it and just further round it out a little bit from the perspective of guys. Because I really think that this passage begins and rests on the guy getting it right first. And so when the guy gets it in line, then that makes it easier for the girls to get in line. If we don't get it in line, then it's harder for the girls to wrap their heads around this. So let me say this. Guys, don't get preoccupied with the idea of being the boss. We are far wiser to walk away from this passage understanding that God didn't so much leave us in charge as He made us responsible. And He is going to hold us responsible. Okay? When you're in charge, you're responsible. So walk away today from this going, I don't get to tell you what I think and you have to do what I say. Walk away from this saying, I better make sure that I've got my ducks in a row and my bases covered here. Because one day God's going to talk to me about that. And if He has an issue, then I'm going to have an issue. So approach it from that perspective. And if you're still interested in pursuing this whole boss thing, then I've got another question for you, dudes. Since when did being appointed to a position ever make you accomplished at the position? Since when have you ever been given a new title, platform, a new job, or whatever it is, and that has made you automatically successful? Not in my recollection. As a matter of fact, there's a business principle, the Peter Principle they call it, where they would say that everyone is promoted to their own level of incompetence. And so some of us guys have arrived there already, just by having been promoted to in charge. So be careful with that. Joel Trammell in Forbes magazine writes this, and I think we can learn some lessons from industry itself, guys, when it comes to being good leaders, good models, good heads of our home. Trammell writes that there are 3 attributes of successful leaders and CEOs. They are credibility, competence, and caring. Each boss, each CEO, each leader that is successful exhibits all 3. Not just 1 or 2, but all 3. If they don't have all 3, then they significantly diminish in their success as a leader. So in that, then he unpacks it this way. Credibility really breaks down to honesty. Which is to say, guys, you better tell the truth. no lying. All the time. Every time. It's not good enough to tell the truth 90% of the time. And 10% you can fudge. That is not a passing grade here. If you're not honest all of the time, your credibility goes out the window. So be honest. Number 2, competence. Understand your role and your responsibilities. Understand who it is that you're working with and understand who it is that you're working for. That's the business equivalent. In your marriage, then, understand your wife. If you have family, understand your wife and your kids. Understand what your role is and your responsibilities are as the husband, as the father. And then understand what it is that you're doing this all for, where you're going with this. We'll talk about that more in terms of kids next week. On this point of competence, ladies, let me just parenthetically move over here and talk to you just briefly. I recommend highly that you don't marry somebody that isn't as bright as you are. If they're not competent, it's going to be harder to navigate with them, isn't it? And I get it. For a while, it's cute when they look at you and go, huh? And you say, oh, come with me, grasshopper, I'll explain it. Ladies don't see husbands the way that they are. They see them the way they're going to fix them up, not knowing that's a lot bigger problem, bigger challenge than they anticipate. So after a while, the gets a little bit exasperating. So make sure that this guy comes to the table with as many marbles as you do. That'll just go better for you. Okay, guys, back to you. Thank you for that brief vignette. Caring is the last aspect here. The last aspect of caring means that leaders care for their people. They are consistently and clearly demonstrating over and over that they care about their people. They care about their company. They care about their product. In your marriage, then, caring means that you consistently and clearly care for your wife and for your family. So put those things in your hat and work on those guys. And ladies, stick with me now. I'm going to move to you. Number 2, Genesis 2, verse 20 says that God made Adam a helpmate. Some versions would call her a helper. So ladies, help your men. Lord knows they need it. Literally. That's why He made you a helper. You bring to the party a whole lot of things that you can help your guys with. And as you do, then you will help them to flourish in their role as your husband, and that just makes that world go better. So, don't set them up. Set them up for success. And you've been there. You ask the question, and the guys know it too. There is no right answer to this question. I've been set up. Anything I say now is trouble. It's going to be a long afternoon. Don't do that, girls. Set them up for success. Help them to navigate. Help your guys to navigate and get it right. Okay, guys, number 3. He who finds a wife has found a good thing, we read in Proverbs 18, verse 22. Whoever finds a wife has found a good thing. So, guys, treat her that way. Treat her as a good thing. And I've looked. There is no reciprocal verse for us guys. Nowhere in my Bible can I find the verse that says, ladies, if you found a husband, you've found a good thing. I refer you back to point 2. Ladies, if you found a husband, you found somebody that needs help. So guys, remember that. They're here to help you. You've found a good thing. Treat them that way. Treat them well. Treat them good. Okay, ladies, number 4. This is a little delicate, so bear with me. Proverbs 19, verse 13. A quarrelsome wife is like the constant dripping of a leaky roof. Ryan used some of these verses last week. Proverbs 21, verse 9. It's better to live on the corner of a roof than share a house with a quarrelsome wife. That's like me standing here and trying to preach from here. It's very dangerous. When you live with a quarrelsome wife, it's better to live on the corner of a roof. That's interesting. Proverbs 19:21, it's better to live in a desert than with a quarrelsome and nagging wife. And I could go on, there's a couple other verses. They all fall within about 5 chapters of each other in Proverbs. I don't know what was going on in Solomon's life at that point, but he was definitely taking notes. Something he was watching there. Okay, so let me just speak to this really briefly. And I'm actually going to sum this up by saying that the cumulative effect of living with such a woman, as is defined here in these verses, has been summed up very succinctly by the country group, the Notorious Cherry Bombs. In the title of their song, that's this: "It's hard to kiss the lips at night that chew your butt out all day long." And forgive me for paraphrasing there just a little bit for the sake of the church this morning. Ladies, need I say more? I know it's a little crass, but it's true. Make it exciting and desirable for your guys to come home at night. Not so that they regret it within 5 minutes of walking in the door. Na. You gotta lean in here and help them out and make it exciting for them to come home and so that they look forward to getting home to see you and what's going to happen through the rest of the day. And lastly, number 5, in Mark 10, verse 9, we read this, and this is for everyone. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." And that means you too. We get to this part of the marriage vows or the marriage ceremony, and the bride has said, "I do," and the groom has said, "I do," and the pastor says, "Let no man put this asunder." And he seems to be talking to the congregation. And I think we always interpret it from that perspective. Let nobody talk about this anymore. It's all joined together. And we forget that we are a part of that as well. That he's talking to the bride and the groom. He's talking to you and me as well. To put asunder means to divide or to separate into parts. So that's to say, guys and girls, no carving your spouse. Not to the guys, not to the girls, not under your breath, and definitely never in front of the kids. Speak well of them. Train yourselves to see them in that light, that they are good, that they are valuable, that they are worth your effort and your investment. And then watch as God allows that relationship to flourish. Lastly, I just want to say one more thing. From Proverbs 3. In all your relationships, each one of your marriages, acknowledge God and let Him direct your paths. And you'll find Him consistently moving you and working you towards success. Let's pray. God, this morning, we say thank you for the gift of relationship. First and foremost, the gift of your relationship with us. But then beyond that as well, to the relationships with one another and especially the marriage relationship. God, thank you that you've given us that. Help us now to leverage it and maximize it. Help us to invest in it to the best of our ability so that we would experience it in its fullness just the way that you've intended for us. And also, God, so that we would also be able to model it well for the world around us, and in so doing, to show the world who you are. To that end, God, I would ask that you would bless each marriage here. I would pray for a blessing on each marriage in our church. For those that are visiting with us this morning as well. God, would you just pour out your blessings on them. Help them to grow together. Help them to flourish with one another. Where there's difficulty and trouble, would you help to restore that? Would you help to go before that and even just to level out those challenges and those hurdles as best as possible. And so to that end, God, I would ask that you'd go before us and make us good students this morning. Bring to mind things even that we've talked about today that would help us to find the right perspective, to find your perspective in this so that we could pursue it well. And to that end, again, I pray all of these things in your Son's name. Amen.